Hi English learners, how are you today? What did you get up to? Today, I went to the cinema and watched an incredibly hilarious movie. After the movie, I went home and ate an extremely enormous cake. It was very delicious. After eating the cake, I felt a bit exhausted. So I went to bed, and that was my day. Now there is a lesson in this story I just told you. There were 4 errors. That's right, all of these sentences were incorrect. Now for the important question. Do you know why these sentences are incorrect? If you're struggling to explain why these sentences are incorrect, then stick around, because the focus of today's lesson is how to correctly use adjectives with modifiers. And I'm also going to help you to expand your descriptive vocabulary. Hello everybody, and welcome to another lesson. So the reason these sentences were incorrect is because the adverbs that I used cannot go with these adjectives. Let me explain it to you with some simpler examples, and then we will return to these and other more advanced vocabulary towards the end of the lesson. Let's take a simple adjective. Cold. Remember, an adjective is just a word that gives more information about a noun or a pronoun. The big dog, the heavy rock, the cold weather. Now, what if we wanted to say how big the dog was, or how heavy the rock was, or how cold it is? We could use an adverb to modify the adjective. An adverb is just a word that gives more information about a verb, another adverb, or an adjective. So we could say, for example, it was a bit cold. Okay, it was a bit cold. If it was even colder, you could say it was very cold. If it was even colder, you could say it was extremely cold. Now, how do we say it was even colder than extremely cold? We say it was freezing. Now, how do we go even colder than freezing? Can we say it was very freezing or extremely freezing? No, we can't. We can use other words which add emphasis, like absolutely. It was absolutely freezing, but we can't use the same modifiers that we use with cold. We can't say it was very freezing or extremely freezing. Okay? I will speak more about this in a moment, so stay with me. I'll give you another example. All right, a big dog, a very big dog, an extremely big dog, then an enormous dog, or a gigantic dog, or a huge dog. All of these are the biggest something can be. But you cannot say a very huge dog, or an extremely enormous dog. These adjectives cannot be measured. You can add emphasis and say this dog is absolutely enormous, but you can't say he is very enormous or extremely enormous. There is no range of enormous. Okay? So very interesting, grammar man. How do we know which adjectives we can modify and which ones we can't? Great question. There are 2 types of adjectives. We have gradable and non-gradable adjectives. And all that means is that gradable adjectives can be measured. We can say how cold or how tall or how hot something is. Okay, he is quite tall, he is very tall, he is extremely tall. We can change the level of tallness by adding certain modifying words. Normally adverbs like the ones that I've mentioned. Quite, very, extremely. But there are others which I will show you in a moment. The key point is that we can change the level of the gradable adjective. There is a range, a scale. Now conversely, non-gradable adjectives we cannot modify in the same way. We cannot change the level. Okay, there is no range. We cannot say something is a little bit enormous or very enormous or extremely enormous. Okay, as mentioned, we could add emphasis and say it is absolutely enormous, but we can't answer the question, how enormous is it? There is no range. Okay, let me first talk a little more about gradable adjectives. Some common examples of gradable adjectives include old, small, big, hungry, beautiful, embarrassed, etc. And we can modify these adjectives, can't we? There are different levels because these are gradable adjectives. And we can do that with these modifiers here. Okay, these are not all of the modifiers that we could use with gradable adjectives, but they are the most common. A bit and slightly, quite, rather, and fairly, very and really, and extremely or incredibly. For example, she was slightly embarrassed, means she is a little embarrassed. But if we said she is very embarrassed or really embarrassed or extremely embarrassed, then she is much more embarrassed, isn't she? So we are grading or measuring how embarrassed she is. Now, conversely, some common non-gradable adjectives include enormous, ancient, gorgeous or stunning, thrilled, terrified, delicious, etc. And these non-gradable adjectives cannot be modified by these words that we use to modify gradable adjectives. This is the important point. You cannot say something is slightly delicious or very gorgeous or incredibly ancient. These modifiers only go with gradable adjectives. The way we modify these non-gradable adjectives is we can add emphasis using these common adverbs here. Absolutely, completely, totally, utterly, really, exceptionally. Okay, there are other ones. This is not the complete list, but these are the most common ones that you will come across. So for example, you might say, this rock is really ancient, or this cake is absolutely delicious, or she is utterly terrified of snakes. And those of you with a really keen eye might have noticed the adverb really can be used with gradable and non-gradable adjectives. You can say something is really big, this is gradable, and you can also say something is really enormous, adding emphasis to a non-gradable adjective. The adverb pretty and quite also share this idiosyncrasy. She's quite terrified of snakes and he is quite tall, for example. Okay, so the next obvious question is, how do we tell which adjectives are gradable and which adjectives are non-gradable? There are two tests. The first one is if the adjective has a comparative and superlative form, then it is a gradable adjective. For example, old, older, oldest, gradable adjective. Embarrassed, more embarrassed, the most embarrassed, gradable adjective. Non-gradable adjectives normally do not have comparative and superlative forms. For example, we can't say more enormous or the most enormous. Sometimes, as with everything in English, this rule is broken though, which is why rule 2 helps a lot. If you can say very before the word, it is gradable. It is very big, it is very cold, etc. But we can't use very with non-gradable adjectives. We can't say she is very terrified or the dog is very enormous. So why do we need to know all of this? Well, for a start, it will help you to avoid the types of errors that I showed you at the start of our lesson. Okay, all of these adjectives are non-gradable and I tried to grade them to show different degrees or levels of them, which, as you now know, you cannot do with non-gradable adjectives. So how do we correct these errors? There are many ways, but let's try a couple now. I watched an incredibly hilarious movie. So we must change either the adverb or the adjective. We could say an incredibly funny movie, couldn't we? Because there are different levels of funny. Funny is a gradable adjective. You can have a little bit funny or very funny or incredibly or extremely funny. Or we can change the adverb and say it was really hilarious or it was absolutely hilarious. Or we can leave out our adverb altogether and just say I watched a hilarious movie. Maybe that is all the intensity that you want to convey, and you don't need the adverb for emphasis. Okay, and it's the same with the other three sentences. I ate an extremely enormous cake. You could change this to an absolutely enormous cake. And it was really delicious, because really can go with gradable and non-gradable adjectives. And then I felt utterly exhausted, so I went to bed. Now the other reason, which I believe is more important, that I wanted to show you this lesson, is to make you more aware of adjective and adverb collocations. Collocations just mean words that typically go together, words that commonly go with other words. Increasing your range of adjectives and adding emphasis to some of them with adverbs is a great way to make your speaking, and in particular your writing, so pay attention IELTS exam takers, it's a great way to make your writing more descriptive, especially if you're at an advanced level. Instead of always using quite simple gradable adjectives and saying, for example, it's a nice city with a relaxing lake with lots of very big mountains, you could say something like, it's an incredibly beautiful city with a tranquil lake surrounded by an array of mesmerizing mountains. Alright, something like that. So I only modified one adjective there, incredibly beautiful. But I used some more advanced adjectives, tranquil and mesmerizing, which created enough impact on their own. It's a fine line. You don't want to add adverbs to every adjective or you will sound utterly ridiculous. But the point is to pay attention to how other native speakers use their adjectives and adverbs by watching English YouTube videos and TV shows and movies. And one of the best ways to improve your adverbs and adjectives is to read. I've mentioned this before in my previous video lessons. The best books to read are called graded reader books. Okay, they're fairly cheap and are graded on a scale normally between 1 and 6, with 1 having very basic vocabulary and 6 having quite high vocabulary. And you can Google these. I'll also put a link in the description below this video to Oxford's graded reader test, where you can do a little test online and work out your level between 1 and 6. And I'll put a link to graded reader books on Amazon. But you do have a look around yourself on Google, because I know Cambridge and Macmillan and some other companies make these graded reader books. It's not just Oxford. So have a look. And yes, apart from that, I'll make a video in the next few lessons on how specifically to be more descriptive in your writing and speaking. And I'll include some set collocations that you can incorporate into your current vocabulary, which will be very useful for anyone completing any of the Cambridge exams. That's it for today's lesson, everyone. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Share my video with friends who you think will benefit from my content. And most importantly, have an absolutely incredible day. Cheers.